It is December 22, 1849, in St. Petersburg, Semyonovsky Square. The temperature is well below freezing. A line of prisoners stands shivering in the deep snow, wearing nothing but thin white burial shrouds. Facing them is a fully armed firing squad. One of those shivering prisoners is a 28-year-old writer named Fyodor Dostoevsky. Looking at the men tied to the posts ahead of him, he does the math in his head. He realizes he has exactly 5 minutes left to live. Before the rifles are raised, the guards force the condemned through final rituals. A priest steps forward, requiring each man to kiss an Orthodox cross, specifically one bearing a skull at its base. Then comes the ritual of civil death. A guard forces Dostoevsky to his knees. A heavy sword is snapped in half over his head, a gesture that legally terminates his rights and his status as a citizen. The firing squad takes aim. But before the triggers are pulled, we have to look back.
How did a young man attending a Friday night book club end up staring down the barrels of a state firing squad? In the 1840s, Tsar Nicholas I lived in a state of constant paranoia. As revolutions toppled governments across Europe, he enforced strict censorship laws within Russia, making free thought a dangerous pursuit. Despite the risks, young intellectuals gathered secretly on Friday nights in what became known as the Petrashevsky Circle. The Petrashevsky Circle was an underground discussion group where members read banned Western philosophy and debated social reform. Dostoevsky was a regular at these meetings. He was a thinker, focused mostly on the role of literature and the urgent need to abolish the practice of serfdom, the Russian system where peasants were legally tied to the land and owned by landlords. His crime was a verbal one. During one meeting, Dostoevsky read aloud a banned letter written by a prominent critic, a text that explicitly attacked both the Russian Orthodox Church and the Tsar's reliance on serf labor. That single reading was enough. At 4 o'clock in the morning on April 23, 1849, the Tsar's secret police swept through St. Petersburg, arresting 35 members of the circle. Dostoevsky was dragged to the Peter and Paul Fortress, a high-security prison situated in the middle of the Neva River. He spent 8 months locked in a cell, enduring interrogations while waiting for his death sentence. In this autocracy, there was no distinction between a violent rebel and a man reading a letter. Discussing progressive ideas was viewed as a contagion that the state decided to cure with the death penalty. Back in Semyonovsky Square, the guards tie the first 3 men to the execution posts and pull blindfolds over their eyes. Dostoevsky is in the second group. He stands in the snow, watching his friends prepare to die. With his own death just moments away, his mind kicks into a state of hyper-focus. He resolves to absorb every detail of the square, the faces of the soldiers, and the light off the snow, determined to value every remaining second. The commanding officer shouts the final order. A line of soldiers simultaneously raise their rifles. They place their fingers on the triggers. Then a drumbeat echoes across the square, the military signal for retreat. A rider carrying a white flag gallops into view. He is an envoy from the Tsar, and he reads a royal decree. The executions are halted. The sentences have been reduced to hard labor in Siberia. The men collapse in relief, but this was never an act of mercy. The Tsar had signed the orders for exile days earlier. The death sentence, the burial shrouds, and the raised rifles were all part of a meticulously choreographed lie. The psychological toll of this theatrics was immediate. Standing directly in front of the firing squad, one of Dostoevsky's peers, an officer named Grigoriev, suffered a mental collapse. He permanently lost his mind right there on the scaffold. The state designed this theatrical execution to break the dissident spirits, using the trauma of imminent death to force their absolute submission to the Tsar. Later that evening, Dostoevsky sits alone in his cell. The silence of the stone walls is a sharp contrast to the noise and freezing wind of the morning. He asks for pen and paper and writes a letter to his brother, Mikhail. In it, he explains that he has spent nearly an hour staring directly at death, and having survived it, he is being reborn in another form. He writes about his regret for the years he spent in idleness and boredom. He describes a new understanding of life, not as a sequence of days, but as a series of moments that are, as he put, a gift and a happiness. Dostoevsky eventually translated this sensory overload into his fiction. In his masterpiece, The Idiot, he uses his own memory of the firing squad to describe a man who views every single minute of consciousness as an entire lifetime of wealth. But his literary triumphs were still years away.
3 days after writing to his brother, Dostoevsky was locked into heavy iron shackles and sent thousands of miles eastward. The Tsar's attempt to crush Dostoevsky instead provided him with the central obsession of his career. Next, we follow him into the Siberian camps to see what happens when an intellectual writer is forced to live for 4 years alongside the most violent criminals in Russia.